Have you ever felt that righteous anger, the kind that burns cold and clear, when you see someone in power just steamroll over the vulnerable? That's where my story begins. They thought my brother, Mark, was just another absent homeowner, an easy target. They sold his house, his sanctuary, for a measly $12,000 while he was deployed, serving our country. What they didn't know, what that power-tripping HOA President Brenda Jenkins didn't know, was that Mark isn't just any airman. He's an Air Force intelligence officer. And she didn't know about me, his brother, the guy who used to untangle financial knots for a living. Stick around, because you're going to want to hear how this played out. And hey, while you're settling in, let me know in the comments, have you ever had a run-in with an HOA that just seemed completely out of control? I am genuinely curious. My world had shrunk to the size of my grief. Sarah, my wife, my anchor, had been gone for 6 months, a hollow ache that shadowed every sunrise. Our daughter, Lily, all of 10 years old, was navigating her own sorrow with a quiet bravery that broke my heart daily. We'd moved to this quiet, unassuming town, into a small rental, partly to escape the constant reminders in our old home, and partly to be closer to where Mark, my younger brother, had his house. He was on a long deployment, somewhere dusty and dangerous, and knowing his home was nearby, even empty, offered a strange, thin comfort. I imagined him returning to it, to peace, to the life he was building. It was a small point of light in the dim landscape of my days. Before Sarah's illness, my life had been a different beast altogether. Financial crimes investigator. I'd waded through oceans of spreadsheets, followed phantom money trails, and helped put some very slick, very wealthy criminals behind bars. It was demanding, high-stress work, a world away from the quiet routine I was now trying to build for Lily and myself. I was working remotely, a data analysis job that paid the bills but didn't engage the sharper, more restless parts of my mind. Those parts, I thought, were best left dormant. Mark had, of course, left me as his emergency contact for the house. A thick packet of HOA rules and a limited power of attorney for genuine emergencies. Burst pipes, storm damage, that sort of thing. Nothing about selling it, certainly. He'd meticulously arranged for lawn care and regular check-ins with a neighbor before he left. He was thorough, my brother. Always. My first brush with the local homeowners association and its esteemed president, Brenda Jenkins, was over something utterly trivial. I was at Mark's, just checking the perimeter, making sure the lawn guys had been. A woman with a helmet of tightly sprayed blonde hair, a floral dress that seemed aggressively cheerful, and eyes like a hawk spotting a field mouse, marched across the street. "You must be the brother," she'd said, her voice carrying a note of officialdom that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Brenda Jenkins. I'm the HOA president." "Liam Walker," I'd replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just checking on things for Mark." "Good, good." She peered critically at Mark's perfectly manicured lawn. "We like to keep a tidy neighborhood. There was a small issue last month with the recycling bin being left out an hour too long on a Tuesday. I trust that won't happen again under your purview." An hour too long. Right. I'd assured her it wouldn't, making a mental note of her particular brand of petty tyranny. She seemed to swell with self-importance, relishing her role as the guardian of neighborhood conformity. Little did I know, that was just the faintest tremor before the earthquake. A few weeks later, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived, forwarded from Mark's mail, which I collected periodically. It wasn't addressed to Mark in care of me. It was addressed to current occupant at Mark's address, which struck me as odd. I slid it open, my brow furrowed. The words swam before my eyes, cold and brutal. "Final notice of foreclosure sale." My blood ran cold. Foreclosure? Mark's house was paid off. He'd sunk every spare dime into it after our parents passed, wanting a piece of permanence. My hands trembled as I read further. A list of alleged violations. Failure to maintain landscaping. Impossible. I'd seen the invoices for the service, unapproved paint color on the trim. It was the original, HOA-approved color, and a string of fines for these supposed infractions. Fines Mark, being deployed, would never have received. And then, the gut punch. The house had been sold at a public auction, orchestrated by the HOA for the outstanding balance of accumulated fines and legal fees. $12,000. $12,000. For a three-bedroom house with a half-acre lot in a desirable school district, a house easily worth $350,000, probably more in the current market. I felt a wave of nausea. This couldn't be real. It had to be a grotesque mistake. I stumbled inside my rental. The paper clutched in my fist and sank onto the sofa. Lily was at school. I was alone with this monstrous news. The quiet life I'd sought, the fragile peace I'd tried to build, shattered. This wasn't just a mistake. This was theft, plain and simple, dressed up in the pseudo-legal jargon of an HOA. And it had happened to Mark, my brother, who was thousands of miles away, trusting that his home, his investment, was safe. The initial shock gave way to a slow, burning rage. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of youth, but something colder, more focused. This was calculated. This was predatory. And Brenda Jenkins, with her smug pronouncements about tidy lawns and recycling bins, was at the heart of it. My grief for Sarah, a constant, heavy cloak, didn't vanish, but a new, sharper sensation pierced through it, the iron will of a protector. Mark was my family. This was his home. And I, with my supposedly dormant skills, was the only one here to fight for it. Okay, Liam, I thought, the old investigator's voice cutting through the fog in my mind. Breathe. Analyze. What do you know? What do you need to know? The familiar cadence of problem-solving was almost a comfort. This, at least, was a puzzle I understood. A very dirty, very malicious puzzle. My first step was the county recorder's office online portal. Property records. I typed in Mark's address. There was title transferred just 3 days ago. The buyer? A limited liability company I'd never heard of, Blue Heron Estates, LLC. The sale price listed, a sickeningly low $12,247.53. So precise. So obscene. Next, I looked up Blue Heron Estates, LLC. Registered agent, a local attorney, a name I didn't recognize. But the registered address for the LLC itself? It rang a faint bell. A quick search through my local contacts, a leftover habit from my old life, and there it was. The address was connected to a business owned by one Harold Jenkins. Brenda's husband? No, a quick social media skim confirmed it. Brenda's brother-in-law, Harold Harry Jenkins. Well. Isn't that cozy? The pieces were already clicking into place, forming an ugly picture of nepotism and fraud. The HOA documents Mark had left me were a dense brick of bylaws, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I spread them out on the dining table, a battlefield map. For hours, I read, highlighted, cross-referenced. The foreclosure process they outlined was labyrinthine, clearly designed to be confusing, but even within their own convoluted rules, there were procedures for notifying homeowners, opportunities to cure defaults. And then there was the big one, the glaring red flag I'd almost forgotten in my initial rage. The Service Members Civil Relief Act. SCRA. Federal law. It provides specific protections for active duty military personnel against things like foreclosures and default judgments. There was no way they could have legally foreclosed on Mark's house without jumping through significant, specific hoops related to his active duty status. Hoops I was willing to bet my last dollar Brenda Jenkins and her cronies had either ignored or deliberately sidestepped. My mind, so long mired in personal loss, felt suddenly, shockingly clear. The intricate pathways of investigation, the thrill of the hunt, the righteous anger at injustice, it was all flooding back. They picked the wrong house, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling in. They picked the wrong family. The next morning, I drove to Mark's neighborhood, parking a street away and walking. I needed to see. The house looked the same, a quiet sentinel on its neat lawn. But now a small, cheap-looking sold sign, the kind of bottom-feeder investment company might use, was jabbed into the grass near the curb. It felt like a desecration. As I watched, a pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A burly man got out, surveyed the house with an air of proprietary interest, then started fiddling with the front door lock. Probably Harry Jenkins's handyman, or Harry himself. I felt a surge of possessiveness, of fury, but I stayed put. Observation first, action later. I spent the rest of the day digging. I cross-referenced HOA meeting minutes I found on a barely maintained community website. They were suspiciously vague around the dates Mark's violations would have been discussed. I researched Brenda Jenkins' tenure as president, noting a significant uptick in fines and legal actions since she took over 2 years ago. I even started a discreet search for other homeowners who might have had unusually aggressive dealings with the HOA. My old instincts were humming. This wasn't just about Mark's house. This was a pattern. My first tentative step towards finding allies came through a local online forum, one of those neighborhood gossip pages. I posted a carefully worded, anonymous query about experiences with HOA foreclosure processes in the area, specifically mentioning absentee owners. Within hours, I had a private message. If you're asking about Parkview Meadows HOA, it read, "You need to talk to Arthur Henderson. He used to be on the board. He'll tell you things." Arthur Henderson. The name meant nothing to me, but it was a lead. I found his address. He lived on the other side of the sprawling development. I decided a direct approach was best. That evening, after Lily was in bed, I drove to his house, a modest, well-kept home, much like Mark's. An older gentleman, perhaps in his late 70s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake, answered the door. "Mr. Henderson," I began. "My name is Liam Walker. I was hoping to speak with you about the Parkview Meadows HOA. I understand you used to be on the board." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That was a while ago, and not a period I remember fondly. What's this about?" I took a breath. "It's about my brother, an active-duty Air Force officer. The HOA just foreclosed on his paid-off house and sold it for $12,000. To Brenda Jenkins's brother-in-law, it seems." Arthur Henderson's face changed. The cautiousness remained, but a flicker of something else, anger, recognition, perhaps even vindication, sparked in his eyes. He stepped back. "Come in, Mr. Walker. I think we have a lot to talk about." Over the next 2 hours, fueled by weak tea and a shared sense of outrage, Arthur laid out the groundwork of Brenda Jenkins's reign. He'd been the treasurer, a stickler for rules and transparency, and had been systematically pushed out when Brenda and her faction gained control. "She runs that board like her own personal fiefdom," Arthur said, his voice tight with remembered frustration. "The finances, I always had questions, never got straight answers. She has a pet lawyer, a Mr. Silas Croft, who rubber stamps everything. And the fines, they became a revenue stream, not a deterrent." He confirmed my suspicions about targeting absentee owners. "Easier pickings," he said grimly. "Less likely to fight back, or even know what's happening until it's too late. But a service member, that's bold. Even for Brenda. She must have thought he was completely off the grid. Arthur had no concrete proof of financial malfeasance, just a deep well of suspicion and a list of names. Other homeowners who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's aggressive tactics. Many were too scared or too tired to fight, he explained. "She can make your life miserable." One name he gave me was Eleanor Davis, a retiree whose prize-winning rose garden had suddenly been deemed a noxious weed proliferation, requiring expensive, HOA-mandated removal by a specific, overpriced landscaper. Another one of Brenda's cronies, Arthur suspected. The next day, I visited Eleanor Davis. She was a small, bird-like woman, but her eyes flashed with indignation when I mentioned Brenda Jenkins. Her story was one of petty harassment, escalating fines for non-existent violations, and a deep sense of injustice. "She killed my roses," Mrs. Davis said, her voice trembling. "Said they were attracting aphids that could spread." Nonsense. I won awards for those bushes. She hadn't fought back hard, intimidated by the legal threats and the sheer unpleasantness of it all. But Mark's story, the blatant theft of a soldier's home, struck a chord. "That's not just wrong, young man," she declared, her frail hands clenching. "That's un-American. What can we do?" With Arthur's institutional knowledge and Eleanor's moral outrage, we had the beginnings of a coalition. Arthur, bless his organized soul, still had copies of old financial statements, meeting agendas, and correspondence from his time on the board. He pointed out discrepancies, areas where Brenda's reported expenditures seemed inflated or where income from fines wasn't clearly accounted for. My old financial investigator skills kicked into high gear. This was familiar territory. I began to build a spreadsheet, a timeline, a web of connections. The HOA was a nonprofit, its financial records supposedly open to members. Getting current, detailed records, however, proved to be like pulling teeth. Brenda, through her compliant board secretary, stonewalled our requests, citing privacy concerns, administrative burden, anything to delay. But Arthur knew the bylaws. There were provisions for members to inspect records with reasonable notice. We drafted a formal, legally precise request, citing the specific bylaws, and sent it via certified mail. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, news of my quiet inquiries must have reached Brenda. One afternoon, I found an official HOA violation notice taped to the door of my rental. Unapproved window coverings, it declared, citing a rule about blinds needing to be white or off-white, visible from the street. My blinds were in neutral beige, practically identical to every other house on the street. It was petty. It was harassment. And it told me Brenda was feeling the pressure. She was trying to intimidate me. Bad move, Brenda. It only strengthened my resolve. She also called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was vague. Urgent community matters and bylaw clarifications. Arthur, Eleanor, and I knew this was a power play, a way for her to control the narrative, perhaps push through more restrictive rules or publicly discredit anyone asking questions. She's overconfident, I told Arthur and Eleanor as we met to strategize. She thinks she can bully everyone into silence. She doesn't realize how much evidence we're gathering. The evidence was mounting. We found 2 other instances of questionable property actions against elderly homeowners who had recently moved into assisted living. The pattern was undeniable. Identify vulnerable or absent owners, levy a series of escalating, often bogus, fines, then use the HOA's tame lawyer, Silas Croft, to push through quick foreclosures or liens, often selling the properties or the debt to connected parties for a fraction of their value. Mark's case was the most egregious, the most blatant, but it wasn't isolated. The $12,000 paid for Mark's house by Blue Heron Estates, LLC, Harry Jenkins's company, was laughably low. I commissioned a discreet, drive-by appraisal from a reputable local realtor. His estimate came back $385,000 conservative. The sheer audacity of the theft was breathtaking. I finally managed to get a secure line to Mark. I laid out the situation, concisely, factually. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then his voice, tight with controlled fury. Liam, they did what? I could almost hear the intel officer in him, processing, analyzing, compartmentalizing his anger. The SCRA, he said, they can't do that. My deployment orders, my official status, it's all on file with my mortgage company, though the house is paid off. The HOA has my contact information, my unit's contact, everything. I know, Mark. They either didn't check or they didn't care. I'm handling it. I have a plan. What do you need from me? He asked. No panic, just focus. That was Mark. Copies of your deployment orders, anything showing your official active duty timeline, and your permission to act fully on your behalf legally to recover the house and pursue damages. You have it. All of it. Get them, Liam. Get them good. His words were like a shot of adrenaline. The plan had been forming in my mind, a multi-pronged attack. First, the legal spearhead, a lawsuit based on the clear SCRA violations to invalidate the sale of Mark's house immediately. Second, a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, detailing the suspected financial fraud, self-dealing, and pattern of predatory practices by the HOA leadership, backed by Arthur's historical data and our new findings. Third, the community action. Galvanize the homeowners, present them with the undeniable proof at Brenda's own emergency meeting, and initiate proceedings to remove her and her cronies from aboard. The stakes were rising. Brenda, sensing a threat she couldn't quite identify, doubled down on her arrogance. At a brief, tense encounter in the grocery store, she'd smirked at me. Heard you're having some trouble with your rental, Mr. Walker. Amazing how quickly little things can add up if you don't follow the rules, isn't it? Her tone was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were cold. She thought she was untouchable. Through a contact from my old life, I found a lawyer, a sharp young woman named Ms. Chun, who specialized in property law and had a soft spot for veteran cases. She reviewed Mark's situation and my compiled evidence, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is outrageous," she stated, her voice crisp. "The SCRA violations alone are a slam dunk to get the sale voided. And the rest? This smells like a RICO case waiting to happen if the AG's office is competent." She agreed to take the case, her fee contingent on recovering damages beyond just the house. The day before Brenda's emergency HOA meeting, Ms. Chun filed the lawsuit against Parkview Meadows HOA, Blue Heron Estates LLC, and Brenda Jenkins personally, citing gross negligence and violations of the Service Member Civil Relief Act. We also sent our meticulously compiled dossier of financial irregularities and predatory practices to the State Attorney General's office, flagged for urgent review. The pieces were in motion. The atmosphere in the community clubhouse, where Brenda Jenkins had called her emergency HOA meeting, was thick with a mixture of apathy, curiosity, and a low hum of discontent. Brenda, flanked by her two loyal board members, a nervous-looking man named Gerald and a woman, Carol, who mirrored Brenda's smugness, stood at the podium, a gavel in her hand, ready to assert her dominance. She clearly expected to control the proceedings, to shut down any dissent with her usual blend of condescension and bureaucratic maneuvering. About 50 homeowners were scattered around the room, many looking bored, others whispering amongst themselves. Arthur, Eleanor, and a few other homeowners we cautiously brought into our confidence were strategically seated. I sat near the back, Ms. Chun beside me, our files neatly stacked. Brenda banged the gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Parkview Meadows Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice overly loud in the somewhat shabby room. "We have some urgent matters to discuss regarding adherence to community standards and some unfortunate misinformation that seems to be circulating." Her eyes flicked towards me, a clear warning. She launched into a rambling monologue about the importance of rules, property values, and the tireless work the board did to maintain the exclusive character of their neighborhood. It was a masterclass in self-congratulation and veiled threats. Several residents shifted uncomfortably. When she finally paused for breath, Arthur Henderson stood up, his voice surprisingly firm. "Madam President, before you proceed with your agenda, there's some rather more urgent matters that the members need to be made aware of. Specifically, the matter of the fraudulent foreclosure and sale of the home of Master Sergeant Mark Walker, an active duty member of the United States Air Force." A surprised murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "Mr. Henderson, that matter is closed and was handled entirely according to HOA bylaws. This is not the forum for—" "Actually, Madam President," Ms. Chin's clear, calm voice cut through Brenda's attempt to shut Arthur down. She rose gracefully. "It is precisely the forum. As legal counsel for Master Sergeant Walker, I can assure you this matter is far from closed." She held up a sheaf of papers. "This is a copy of a lawsuit filed yesterday in county court against this HOA, yourself personally, and Blue Heron Estates LLC, for violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, fraudulent conveyance, and conspiracy. Master Sergeant Walker's home, which he owns outright, was illegally sold for a pittance to an entity controlled by her brother-in-law, Harold Jenkins, while my client is deployed overseas serving this country." Gasps rippled through the room. Brenda's face went from smug to a blotchy red. "This is an outrage. Slander. My brother-in-law is a legitimate businessman. Is he?" I finally spoke, rising and stepping forward. "Is it legitimate business, Brenda, to target the homes of deployed soldiers, the elderly, the vulnerable, to fabricate violations, manipulate HOA processes, and enrich your family and friends at the expense of your neighbors?" I laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The forged violation notices for Mark's property, the rushed, unminuted board vote authorizing the foreclosure, the ridiculously low sale price, the clear conflict of interest with Harry Jenkins. Then I broadened the scope, detailing the similar patterns we'd uncovered with other properties, showing the inflated invoices from preferred vendors, the murky accounting Arthur had flagged years ago. Eleanor Davis stood up and briefly, emotionally, told her story about the roses and the intimidation. Others began to murmur their own experiences with Brenda's heavy-handed rule. And as for Master Sergeant Walker, I continued, my voice ringing with conviction, Brenda, you seem to have overlooked a critical detail. He's not just some anonymous airman. He's an Air Force intelligence officer. These are men and women who are experts at uncovering deception, at meticulous investigation. Messing with one of them, or their family, wasn't your brightest move. The mention of intelligence officer seemed to land with particular weight. It wasn't about Marsh showing up in uniform with a squadron. It was the implication of his training, his seriousness, the gravity of defrauding someone in such a dedicated and sensitive role. The crowd was no longer apathetic. They were angry. Faces were turned towards Brenda, expressions ranging from shock to open hostility. Her loyal board members, Gerald and Carol, looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them. Gerald was visibly sweating. Carol was no longer smirking. Brenda tried to bluster. This is a conspiracy by disgruntled individuals. I have always acted in the best interests of this community. Her voice was shrill, losing its authoritative timbre. Then perhaps you can explain these financial records to the community, I said, projecting a summary of the suspect transactions onto a screen we'd set up. Or these emails between yourself and Silas Croft discussing how to expedite the Walker property issue before he gets wind of it. Arthur had found those gems on an old backup drive he'd kept. The turning point was palpable. It was no longer my word, or even Ms. Chen's, against Brenda's. It was a mountain of evidence, laid bare for everyone to see. Harry Jenkins, Brenda's brother-in-law, who had unwisely decided to attend the meeting to see the troublemakers put in their place, was now trying to shrink into his chair, his face pale. Brenda slammed the gavel repeatedly. This meeting is adjourned. These accusations are baseless. But no one was listening to her anymore. The outrage was a tidal wave. I think not, Brenda, Arthur said, his voice carrying surprising authority. According to Bylaw 7, Section C, a motion to remove board members can be brought by member petition and voted upon at any duly called meeting, provided a quorum is present. And we have a quorum. And we have a petition. He held up a clipboard with a long list of signatures they had quietly gathered over the past week. The chaos was controlled but absolute. Brenda sputtered, threatened, even shed a few crocodile tears, but her reign was over. The vote to remove her, Gerald, and Carol from the board was nearly unanimous. The relief in the room was a physical thing, like a storm breaking. Just as the vote concluded, two plainclothes individuals entered the back of the room. One of them approached Ms. Chen quietly. She listened, nodded, then addressed the stunned assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears the State Attorney General's office has also found merit in the information provided to them. They have opened a formal investigation into the financial practices of the Parkview Meadows HOA under the leadership of Ms. Jenkins. Brenda Jenkins looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. The fight drained out of her completely. She was escorted from the podium, no longer president, no longer powerful, just a woman facing the severe consequences of her greed and arrogance. The fallout was swift and satisfying. The lawsuit regarding Mark's house, buttressed by the undeniable SCRA violations, resulted in an expedited judgment. The sale to Blue Heron Estates LLC was voided. The title was restored to Mark, free and clear. Harry Jenkins's company was lucky to escape with just the loss of its paltry investment and a severely damaged reputation. There was talk of him facing charges for his role in the fraudulent conveyance. The Attorney General's investigation moved with surprising speed. They uncovered years of systematic embezzlement, rigged contracts, and abuse of power. Brenda Jenkins, along with her pet lawyer Silas Croft and a couple of her most complicit cronies on the former board, were indicted on multiple felony charges including fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The HOA's finances were placed under temporary receivership by the state to untangle the mess. For me, the immediate vindication was seeing Mark's house legally his again. I went over the next day, took down the cheap sold sign, and felt a profound sense of relief. I'd done right by my brother. My old skills, the ones I thought I'd buried with my old life, had not only resurfaced but had been instrumental in bringing down a corrupt system. In the weeks that followed, an interim HOA board was elected, with Arthur Henderson reluctantly agreeing to serve as treasurer again. Just to get things straightened out, the community, once fractured by suspicion and fear, began to come together. There was a shared sense of purpose, a determination to create a truly fair and transparent HOA. They undertook a complete overhaul of the bylaws, implementing stringent checks and balances to prevent such abuses from ever happening again. The reign of petty tyranny was definitively over. For Lily and me, life began to find a new rhythm. The intensity of the fight had, in a strange way, been a crucible. It had given me a focus beyond my grief, a way to channel my energy into something constructive. Lily had watched her quiet, grieving father transform into a determined advocate, a quiet warrior. I saw a new respect in her eyes, and it warmed me more than any professional accolade ever had. We decided to stay. The community, for all its recent turmoil, felt like a place where we could belong, a place where people were willing to fight for what was right. I even found myself volunteering to help the new board draft clearer financial reporting guidelines. My old expertise, surprisingly welcome. Mark called when he got the full news, his voice thick with emotion. "Liam, I don't know what to say. You saved my home. You saved me a world of trouble I wouldn't have known about for months." "That's what brothers do, Mark," I told him, a lump in my own throat. "Just come home safe." "I will," he promised. "And the first beer is on me. At my place." Brenda Jenkins's downfall was complete and public. She faced hefty fines and a prison sentence, her reputation in tatters. She lost her own home to legal fees and restitution payments. She became a cautionary tale, a stark example of how arrogance and the abuse of power ultimately lead to ruin. Silas Croft was disbarred. Even some of the vendors who had colluded with her faced penalties. Looking back, it's clear that this whole ordeal was more than just about a house. It was about justice, about standing up to a bully, about the quiet power of ordinary people refusing to be victimized. It showed that even in the face of entrenched corruption, one person, armed with the truth and a willingness to fight, can make a difference. It also reminded me that skills, once learned, are never truly lost. Sometimes they just wait for the right moment, the right cause, to reawaken. The fight for Mark's house brought me out of the shadows of my sorrow and back into the light of purpose. So, that's the story of how an HOA Karen tried to steal a soldier's home and ended up losing everything herself. It just goes to show you, never underestimate the quiet ones, the grieving ones, the ones who look like easy marks. And certainly, never underestimate the lengths a brother will go to protect his family, especially when that family includes someone who dedicates their life to serving others. Justice, when it finally arrives, can be incredibly satisfying. And sometimes, it opens up a whole new chapter you never expected. Maybe the most important lesson is that even when you think you're beaten down, there's always a way to fight back, to reclaim what's yours, and to build something better from the ashes. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it gives you a little bit of hope, or at least a good sense of vindication.